Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. Before I introduce my guest, I'm going to talk about my guest, and then I'll talk to my guest. My guest is Dr. Terry Mason, and I want to read a short part of his very extensive biography. Dr. Terry Mason is the Chief Medical Officer of the Cook County Health and Hospital System in Illinois. He works with 3 hospitals, 16 ambulatory clinics, a public health department, the local juvenile detention center, and the Cook County Jail. He is a board-certified urologist. He practiced medicine for 25 years before being named the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health in 2005. During his tenure there, he focused on fighting chronic disease by promoting healthier lifestyles. That's what we're going to talk about today. He also hosts a radio talk show, and he is, of course, a board-certified urologist. And as a urologist, he found himself dealing with patients who had many challenging medical issues, particularly his specialty, erectile dysfunction. We're going to talk about that after I greet my guest, Dr. Terry Mason. I'm very happy to have you again. And the last time you were here, we called the show The Doctor in the Community. Now we're going to call the show The Doctor in the House, because now you're getting more intimately involved with my viewers, because we're going to be telling them some things about health and nutrition that we hope to be beneficial. And certainly I know that you know whereof you speak, because I watched a film called Forks Over Knives, and then I went out and got the companion book that goes with it, and it has a lot of information in it, as well as a lot of recipes, which I have started to follow. And so we're going to interrupt it from time to time with some clips from the film. But first of all, I want to give some statistics that I want you to speak to. I'm going to start backwards, but the one that I want to come to is probably the most important. Diabetes, 1 of 3 people develop diabetes in a lifetime. Cancer, 1,500 people a day are diagnosed with cancer. Heart disease, 1 heart death per minute. That's 1,440 a day. And the thing that I want to talk about is not just the fact that these things kill you, but these things affect you while you live. And because you're a urologist, and because you found a connection between heart disease and erectile dysfunction, I want you to talk about that, because brothers need to know that it's more than just going to get some kind of over-the-counter drug to solve what is a symptom of a larger problem. So will you talk to us about erectile dysfunction and its relationship to heart disease?
Certainly. And first of all, let me thank you, Dr. Gloria, for an opportunity to come and be on your show and have a conversation with you and your listeners and your viewers. Secondly, I want to let you know that The Doctor in the House is the name of my radio show, and this year represents my 20th year.
Oh, good.
Doing a weekly live radio show on WVON every Sunday. I've been doing it for 20 years now. So it's a live call-in talk show, and many people have called over the 20 years. But I've been very privileged and blessed to do that. To the topic that you've asked me to discuss, and that is the link between erection problems and heart attacks. Dr. Kevin Billups, who was at that time in Minneapolis, and Dr. Alan Banks published some data linking heart disease and men who had erectile dysfunction. And this was what they found. 74% of the men who had a heart attack had erectile dysfunction before their heart attack. Now, what does that mean? The inside lining, if you were to take your tongue and just sort of take your tongue and go around the inside lining of your mouth, your blood cells have a lining like that. And those cells that make up that very delicate lining, the technical name is endothelial cells. And those cells that make up that lining are very important cells because what they do is they help release a substance called nitric oxide. And nitrous oxide is one of those chemicals that help the blood vessels to open up, to dilate. And that lets the blood flow, and that's what helps the man to have an erection. Diseases like diabetes, diseases like blockage of the artery caused by the buildup of plaque or cholesterol, which primarily comes from the consumption of meat and meat-based products, are the things that block the artery. But more importantly than blocking the artery, they also damage the artery. And there is also some inflammation in the artery that also damages these cells on the inside, these endothelial cells. And when the body is damaged on the inside, just like when it's damaged on the outside, it forms a scab. And that scab can sometimes break off and cause problems. If it breaks off in your brain, we call it a stroke. If it breaks off and blocks an artery in your heart, we call it a heart attack. Now, why am I talking about this? Because the penis has more of those endothelial cells per unit volume, in other words, in the space, than probably any other organ in the entire body. So anytime those cells, those endothelial cells, or those cells that line, like I talked about, the mouth of your mouth, are damaged, they then can't release that chemical, the nitrous oxide that I talked about, that opens up the blood vessels. And the diseases like diabetes, the diseases like arteriosclerosis, the diseases like chronic inflammation are the diseases that create this problem. So oftentimes what we've learned over time is that when men are unable to get or maintain their erections as they used to, this may be a sign of more serious disease in other blood vessels, particularly the heart.
That was a very, very well delivered explanation, and I think that if someone doesn't perceive the need to have a physical examination when they get a symptom, because that's what most health challenges are, they are symptoms of something deeper. If they fail to look into the something deeper, they'll solve the external or superficial problem and leave the problem that is the most serious unaddressed.
And you know, what's very interesting is that these problems don't happen overnight. These problems take many, many years to manifest themselves. So the notion of a symptom, and the medical profession has been responsible for this whole notion of signs and symptoms, is really an entirely antiquated concept. Because most diseases don't produce any symptoms in their earliest stages. So a symptom, if I can create an analogy with a car, a symptom would be like waiting till the red light came on, or even worse, the engine started making noises before you decided to take it in for an oil change, as opposed to doing what the manufacturer says: change the oil every 3,000 miles, put this type of gasoline in the car, manage the tires this way, manage the finish if you want it to keep new and shiny this way. And we also have a manual for how we should do our bodies. And unfortunately, there are many men who take much better care of their cars than they do of their body.
I know you're right about that, because I know that in many families, the woman rules the house, the man rules the car. If there's only one vehicle, the man, it's his car, and he decides when it goes or what's going to be done to it or not done to it. I wanted to just quote some more statistics. 100 pounds of meat we were eating by the turn of the century. In 2000,
each person.
By 2007, we were consuming 200 pounds of meat. Sugar consumption was 40 pounds per year in 1913. At the same time, in 2007, it was 147, from 40 to 147. And then the dairy consumption went from 297 pounds to 605 pounds. What accounts for this increase in the consumption of things that are so challenging to the body to process and eliminate?
That's a wonderful question. And let me say that during that time, there was this whole notion that developed, particularly in the 50s and what have you, that we needed more protein. Now, the people that they were showing that needed more protein were these images of these starved children from other parts of the world. And they said, oh, they need more protein, which wasn't really entirely true. And so the need for protein became almost synonymous with meat consumption. And since we said we can't get enough protein and we need to eat more and more and more and more protein, the consumption of those foods, like the meat that you mentioned. At that same time, we went from a society where much of our meals, or many of our meals, were prepared at home, to now beginning to eat more of our meals prepared away from outside the home, boxed cereals and things of this nature. Processed foods. Because we began to get busier and busier. And as a way to manage that, we then began to stop shopping every day, buying small quantities, cooking fresh every day, eating what we cooked that day. And we moved to purchasing more things that were in boxes, cans, jars, bags, frozen food kinds of things. And these things, in order to maintain shelf life, had a number of things that were added to them. And the consumption of sugar rose because we began to look at all of these ads for different kinds of cereals, different types of candies or treats, and we created this notion that these things were treats. So you had a treat that was ice cream.
They were happy foods.
They were happy foods. You had treats that were candies. You had treats that were cookies. You had treats that were, and those things replaced the apples, the plums, the oranges, the grapes that were really the treats. Those things were really tricks. They weren't treats at all. Mm-hmm. And they were laden with high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is a major sweetener that's produced because what we can do with corn, and that's a whole nother policy kind of question, but we took corn and we made a very cheap sweetener from the corn. And it was so cheap, it was cheaper than trying to cut cane. It was cheaper than trying to use the raw products, because we can make tons of this stuff at a very cheap price, and we use it for all and any kind of product. So we then set ourselves on a path for these diseases that we see.
Now, you know that we're not saying all of these things to our viewers just to be giving them some information that goes nowhere. We want them to have the kinds of information that they can make good decisions about nutrition and health, because we see the relationship between health and nutrition. You as a doctor, myself as a person who has had to learn over the years how to take care of myself and my family, and having been blessed to know people like you who will always be there to provide us with this kind of information. So we want to go from the plantation to the plant. Mm-hmm. In other words, I think that what we can easily see is that we have been consuming a diet that people who have no control over their diets, let's say, quote, slaves. Slaves on the plantation had absolutely no control over what they would consume, because they worked from can to can, from sunup to past sundown, and slave kitchens were organized in such a way that they didn't even cook for themselves. There was someone who cooked, much like the franchises that we see in our community. There was a central location where you went to eat, and the rations were given to this central person, and these persons cooked for the whole plantation. And it was decided how many pounds of salt pork, how many pounds of molasses, how many pounds of cornmeal, and so forth. And your diet was mostly the not the high end of the hog, as the people say, but the throwaways. The throwaways from the quote master's table was the diet that slaves consumed. And there was not much they could do about what they ate. Sometimes, if they could find any free time, they were able to grow a small garden and get vegetables or fruit in that way. But generally speaking, they didn't have any discretion about choice in terms of what they would consume. Well, they said that there was something called an Emancipation Proclamation, which the jury for me is still out on, but at some point we left the plantation, yet we are still consuming a plantation diet. We are still eating as though we have no control over what we consume. We can't research it, we can't know anything about it, we just pass it on from generation to generation. So now we are getting some enlightenment in our community through people such as you. And we know now that high consumption of high level sugar, high level sodium, high level oil and fat, high levels of flesh, high levels of dairy products, we know these things now to be detrimental. And we can make choices because we are free enough to make some choices if we have some information. Now, this film that you were part of, and this book that you are part of, and these recipes that you have contributed to, are all ways that people can improve on the way that they nourish their bodies. And I want you to talk about the things that you say in the film. At some point, we're going to have a film clip to show the audience, and we'll be able to let them see that film, which I was able to get a copy of from the library. So you know, it's available. There's a waiting list. You know, there are holes on them, and you have to wait a minute, but you still can get the film. Talk to us about transitioning from the plantation to the plant.
Well, the data is pretty clear. As a matter of fact, the American Cholesterol Education Project, before one is put on medications to lower their cholesterol, you are supposed to go through at least 6 weeks of what's called total lifestyle change. And that total lifestyle change really means a shift in your eating from more meat-based kinds of foods to more plant-based kinds of foods. In other words, a whole foods, whole plant-based way of eating. And it's real simple, because if it walks, hops, flies, crawls, swims, got eyes, a mama and a daddy, it's meat. So it's fish meat? Yes. Is beef meat? Yes. Is pork meat? Yes. Is chicken meat? Yes. Is turkey meat? Yes. These are all meats. And all of these things that are meat and all of the things that come from them, the eggs, the milk, and all of those things are all things that also contain cholesterol. So if you have a cholesterol issue, you're supposed to first go to a diet where you don't eat as much of those things that contain cholesterol, but eat those things that do not. And those things that do not contain cholesterol come from plants. And they're things that are green, they're purple, they're orange, they're the rainbow or kaleidoscope of colors. So what we need to do is really concentrate. And the diets that the recipes that you indicate in this book are really ways to be able to put different combinations of plant-based foods together. Now in America, you talk about people cutting back significantly or even going to a situation where they don't eat meat at all, and it is almost you're some sort of heretic But there are many countries full of more people than we have in America that don't eat any animal products or animal flesh at all. And they all seem to do quite well. And this notion that you have to have animal protein in order to get enough protein, I would just say all of the animals that you eat for protein don't eat any meat for protein for themselves. So cows
Eat grass.
eat grass, or that's what we hope they eat, but sometimes they're eating this feed stuff.
Right.
But the strong animals that we see, horses, bulls,
Elephants.
none of these animals use animal sources as sources of protein, and they have far bigger muscle masses than we do. When you look at a horse, I mean, a horse is just an amazing animal. And we even we describe how much force can be generated by horsepower. But this is an animal that when you see him or her eating in the natural habitat, they're eating a plant-based way of eating. So, and there are many, many examples of this. So there are a lot of things that we've been sort of misled. And I think our journey needs to be back toward, because see, when we were brought here, and we have to understand that we were not slaves when we came here. We were not slaves.
Absolutely.
And and a slave history is not our genesis. That is not who we were.
Absolutely
we were a whole people who were healthy, who were vibrant, who were captive.
Who were free.
Who were free people, who were made to be slaves. And we were disconnected, as you began to point out, we were disconnected. I'm talking about black people in America now. We were disconnected from our heritage, our history, our way of eating, and everything. And we adopted as a survival mechanism what you just talked about. And as part of that adaptation, it created some changes in our body that made us, we believe, even more susceptible to some of the diseases that we talk about. And to get back toward, or to move back toward a restorative way, we just need to go back and eat more things that have life, that come from the ground, that we can take in the energy of that plant and feed that life energy from the plant to feed our own life energy. And that book contains many of those kinds of things, because we have to know that in order to eat any animal flesh, it has to be dead. And
that's why I thought the key word is life here.
It is life. It has to be dead.
You cannot get life from death.
And when we talk about, and I just want to put this out there, when they talk about aged beef, when you talk about aged beef, what they're doing is they put it in a controlled environment. And aged beef is a controlled rotting process.
Decomposition.
It's the decomposition, because the flesh, when it begins to decompose, it releases enzymes that help it to digest itself. And when you do that in beef, it tenderizes it. So but you need to know that that's what it is. It's controlled decomposition of the meat. Now, are you saying, Dr. Mason, you should never eat meat, that it's totally bad? I'm saying that all you should do is avail yourself of the information. And when you read the information, you will come to your own conclusion what is good for you or what is not good for you. And your journey, it doesn't matter where you are right now. You can always start. And if you want to start, you can always start by adding and increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables. Preferably, your vegetables many times should be eaten as salads, so that you get the true value from them. But even when they're cooked in different combinations, still provide the appropriate nutrient for you.
You know, I want to see if we can bring up a clip now, and if we can, I have some more questions, lots of them.
Side effects, not least of which is adding a lot of empty calories.
Dr. Terry Mason is Commissioner of Health for the City of Chicago. He's one of the few public officials in America who openly supports a plant-based diet.
If it walked, hopped, swam, crawled, slithered, had eyes, a mom and a dad, don't eat it.
Dr. Mason contends that the less affluent segments of our population have difficulty making the best food choices.
Well, first of all, the diets are calorie rich and nutrient poor. This is the real problem. And unfortunately, poor people are poor in everything. They're poor in health, they're poor in food choices, they're poor in almost every aspect you can think of.
This makes the less prosperous particularly vulnerable to the low-grade addiction of highly processed foods.
People want stuff that's fast, people want stuff that's quick.
And people want stuff that's available, and there's not a lot of stuff available in some of these food deserts. Sometimes you can drive for the longest period of time and not pass anything more than a convenience store. And so given the fact that you have the challenges of poverty, you know, how can you make better choices even in the face of not being able to go to the store often, not being able to bring back enough things from the store so that you won't have to resort or revert to what you've already been doing? How is it that you compensate for the challenges that people face when they don't have transportation, when they don't have steady, dependable income, steady, dependable, adequate? All of that goes together with income. We are talking now about trying to improve our health so that we won't not only die prematurely, but so that we will not suffer with illnesses, debilitating illnesses before we go. So what is our answer for those people who will say, well, I can't afford to eat organic food, or I can't afford to eat vegetables and fruits all the time? What do we say?
Well, you know, poverty is a real problem, and poverty is really a reflection of policy. There's policy on a federal level, a state level, or what have you, that creates these things. These things don't happen on their own accord. But that being said, people often say, well, it costs so much. Well, it's true that I can go get 2,000 calories for a couple bucks if I go to this place. But you know, I grew up in Inglewood, and 1 of 10 kids. And in terms of poor, we were poor. I didn't know that we were poor, but what was different then is that, you know, and even today, a box of oatmeal is not that expensive. A box of grits is not that expensive.
A pound of beans.
A pound of beans is not that expensive.
A pound of brown rice
is not that expensive, or even white rice if you can't afford the brown rice. So I'm saying is that we began to buy into some things that are true in part, but there are also some opportunities for us to make choices. It is the environment that we live in, the housing that we live in, and the circumstances that the neighborhoods are different. I grew up, as I said, in Inglewood, and we knew all the people on the block. We had neighborhood schools, so all of the children in the block went to school together,
played together
in the neighborhood. There are structures that changed as a result of certain kinds of policies, the injection of certain things in our community. We had the cleaners was owned by a black person, the grocery store was owned by a black person, the barber shops, all of the record stores, all of these things were once owned by us, and now they're gone. And the question we really should be asking ourselves is why? What policies, and that's a whole nother show, Dr. Peace, but what policies created a situation that even not only at the small level, but even at the larger level, we've lost so many of our black businesses. Secondly, why is it that anyone can come in our communities and put up whatever kind of business they want, and they will do reasonably well. Yet, when we try to put up business in our community, we may have issues. Those issues relate to something beyond the scope of this particular show, but it really talks about a deeper problem that whole transatlantic slave trade experience, and the experience in this United States, where it wasn't until 1964 that we got the legal right to be able to go in any public place. So there's a whole history that we need to, that talks about our time here in America that has created what we see today. There are policies that relates to drugs. There are policies that relate to employment and where companies are able to go and what they were able to do that manifest themselves by the loss of jobs that we used to have that provided us with a reasonable wage. And lastly, we as a people should be ashamed of ourselves that in 2012 that we would sit back and say, well, we don't have any grocery stores in our community, that we don't have this and we don't have that. We grown people endowed with all of what God has given us. And why should we in 2012 beg somebody to come and do for us what we should be doing for ourselves? It is what all other people do. You don't see other people of other ethnic origins begging other people to come into their community and set up grocery stores, whether it's Hispanics or the Indians or the Taiwanese or any of these people. They are taking care of themselves. We have another level of dysfunction that goes along with our physical dysfunction, and I call it a mental dysfunction and even a spiritual dysfunction that we have to work on all together in order to regain the wholeness that was once ours and instilled in us the pride and the drive to do what we know God has given us, the absolute power to do. All we need to do is harness that power and proclaim in our spirit that we can do this, we must do this, and we can overcome whatever obstacle gets in our way. And I didn't mean to go way off on something.
Well, you should go way off on that. And you know what? You tempted me, but I'm not going there because I know why we're here this time.
Right.
So I'm not going to try to take up those issues. I have some things to say about them, but it's not important. You've made a very good case for the unity that we need more of, and for our efforts, putting our efforts toward liberating ourselves from the shackles that are still on our minds and preventing us from doing the things that we ought to do for ourselves. In the presence of choice, we ought to make choice. When I said slaves, I said it in quotation marks because I always understand that what we witnessed was the African captive trade, not the African slave trade. And it was not even a trade because we weren't trading anything. We had nothing to say about the transactions in which we were sold off to people to be used as slave labor. So I understand that we were not slaves, but yet we were on a plantation, and our labor was slave labor because we were not compensated, and we were not able to make choices. But now we can exercise some choice. My mother used to walk or send me on a daily basis, and I'd go up and get greens. I'd go up and get beans. I'd go up and get all kinds of things because my mother cooked every day.
That's
and
right.
I did not think that was unusual. that,
And you learned from your mother.
absolutely. And everything was from scratch. We did not have a box in our pantry that you could do anything with but put it together with some other ingredients and turn it into something. So the thing is that we need to begin to revert or Sankofa. We need to go back and fetch it. We need to begin to understand that the basic ingredients that go into a good diet. And one thing I like about this book is that it just doesn't tell you to go off and make these recipes, but it says first you will need certain things. So it tells you the tools that you need to bring into your kitchen and the kinds of ingredients that I made a list of them just to make sure that when I went shopping, that I would have them all, because I didn't want to start a recipe and find out that I didn't have something that I needed to make it and then have to abandon it. So it gives you not only recipes that you can for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, but it also tells you the tools that you need to bring into your kitchen. You need to actually open up your refrigerator and see it as empty. There's nothing in there unless you have been practicing a very good diet. There's probably nothing in your refrigerator that you ought to be consuming, especially if you got one of those freezers full of flesh. Talk about the uric acid in flesh. It's not just the cholesterol, but the uric acid that contributes to inflammation, which contributes to the problems of heart disease and so forth.
Well, the breakdown products from animal protein is contributory to a acidic environment for the body. It is that acidic environment, slightly acidic environment in some cases, that also contribute to the inflammation in the body. The uric acid that you speak about is the constituent that creates a condition known as gout. Gout historically was the disease of the affluent, because the affluent were the only people who could afford lots of meat. Lots of meat breaking down creates more uric acid, and if you're not drinking enough water to make certain that the kidneys can eliminate the uric acid, it will accumulate as crystals in the joint. When that happens in the joint, it creates more inflammation and pain and swelling, and we call that a gout attack. So the gout attack is so if you have gout, one of the things that you need to do first is to begin to severely cut back your consumption of animal-based protein. See your doctor. Make certain that you get the medications and treatment that you need, and be certain that your joint has not been destroyed. But you can heal yourself. We have eaten ourselves into a bad problem. And let me just say this. This is not just Black America. If you go to the CIA World Book website, where the CIA keeps all kinds of information updated almost monthly, one of the tables you will see is a table of life expectancy. And they keep life expectancy to 2 decimal points for over 200 countries around the world. The United States spends more money than any other country in the world on so-called health care. Yet it ranks about 50th in the list of life expectancy from the 221 countries. So what does that say? That says that what we're really looking at is not a health care system. It is a sick care system. It is a system where if you ask somebody what are the leading causes of death, they'll say heart disease, diabetes, stroke, cancer, these kinds of things, when those are not the leading causes of death. Those are the leading effects that cause death. But the true causes of death are smoking, not moving, and eating too much of the wrong kinds of food. So these 3 things, Prince Asiel has a term that he uses. We need to get off of a diet because it has the word die in it, and move to a live it. And use a live it approach to our lives. And I'm not just talking about us eating better foods physically. We need a totally different diet mentally, and another kind of live it mentally, and another kind of live it spiritually. We must rebuild ourselves in the way that we are made. We cannot live in an imbalanced environment. You can't have a great body and a poor mind. You can't have a good mind and a poor body. And you can't have either one of those with a messed up spirit. So and I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a relationship with the forces of creation that are part of everything in the human body is in the earth. We are of the earth. And that's why eating stuff of the earth helps nourish us in a way, because it harmonizes with who we are and what we are. So the book contains great things. And we have had people talk to us over and over. I mean, we have many people. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad put out a book, How to Eat to Live. We have the Hebrew Israelites who put out things, the Seventh-day Adventists who put out things. And this book and that movie that Brian Wendell produced, that I was blessed to be
Food
a part
Incorporated.
of. Well, no, Brian Wendell produced
this one.
Forks Over Knives.
Right, okay.
And I would say that this is a great start, and you can begin to experiment yourself with different combinations. But the problem is, and I'll stop, the problem is, even in communities where we have no problem with access to fresh fruits and vegetables, we are not buying them in the quantities that we need to, because my personal belief is that we are not cooking. We prepare, we microwave, we reheat, but we're not cooking. We're not doing what your mother did when you had to go buy those loose string beans, or those fresh collard greens, or those fresh turnip greens, and you had to come home and you had to wash them and pick them and go through but that was establishing a relationship, and both for you, that was positive for you as a child and your mother or your father, whoever did the cooking. But that's gone today. So we are looking for something that's already done, and that's where we're missing the boat, because everything in there, you got to cook yourself. You got to prepare it yourself. You got to take some time to establish a relationship again with food. We've lost the relationship. We've lost the opportunity to understand the true value of the food and the true value of what cooking does, either singularly or with someone, and certainly the opportunity that we learn from the exchange that we get when we take the time to set a table and eat together.
And love one another. I want to play another clip, even though I don't want you to stop talking. Don't say you got to stop. You don't never have to stop.
No, I get worked up because
I do too.
God has given, I've been blessed to have a ministry, and He's blessed me in incomparable ways to do this work. And I am just so happy to be able to do it, and I am eternally grateful for an opportunity to share this, because our people, not just us, the point I'm trying to make is that people that we call white, or the majority population in the America, they sick too. In fact, if we were to compare them with the people who have less heart disease, less cancer, and less stroke, the gap between their health and our health is greater between the whites and the people like some of the Asians who have less of these diseases, because of the differences in the way they eat. So we have a wonderful opportunity to help lead the world back to nature, back to itself, back to drinking water, back to respect and love for one another, and the respect and appreciation of the small periods of time that we live on this earth, to share with one another. And I am so grateful for this opportunity.
You are great and grateful. I want to play this clip.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Have been so for the last 25 years. And erectile dysfunction is actually the first clinical indicator of generalized cardiovascular disease. It's the canary in the coal mine. It's the thing that lets you know that you have some significant endothelial and vascular disease much earlier than will a heart attack or something like that. We have to stop thinking of the body like it's compartmentalized. It really isn't. The blood goes everywhere in the body. And so if you have vascular disease anywhere, you have it everywhere.
Well, we can't say that too often. You cannot repeat that too often, because you just said vascular disease rather than heart trouble. Because we call things high blood, heart trouble. We don't have even the correct name, so how can we have the correct understanding of what is going on in our bodies? And when you talked earlier about the manual for a car, the manual for the body has to be given priority. There is a way of maintaining health, and you're speaking to it now when you talk about a plant-based diet, when you talk about the necessity for eating fresh food, when you talk about the necessity for preparing the food ourselves. I used to say, who would want somebody's food that they said, I threw it in the microwave, I threw it in the oven, you know, I picked up a bucket of this, you know, a box of that. Where is the love in that? And especially when you consider the fact that you don't know what people are doing in these public kitchens, because they're behind doors and you don't know what they're doing back there. You don't know the health of the people who are cooking, and you also don't know what ingredients that they're using. There are a few exceptions, and I utilize most of them. They're all vegetarian restaurants, because vegetarian people prioritize food. It's important to them. They're not regular restaurants giving you vegetarian food on the side. My family went to a restaurant to celebrate someone's birthday, and I was with them. And so I was questioning the waiter about things that were on the menu, because they claimed that they had a vegetarian menu. But they told us what the vegetarian menu was. The vegetarian menu was, this seafood dish was cooked without the poultry broth, without the chicken broth. Would you ever have thought that there would be a seafood item on the menu that was cooked with chicken broth? This spinach salad, in order for them to make it vegetarian, they would leave out the bacon. So their idea of vegetarian was to remove some animal byproduct from the existing dish, but their focus, their priority was not healthy eating. Their priority was on, number one, profit, and the second thing was to make foods thrill people so that they would come back again and buy more of it. It is very difficult to be what you call a vegetarian or a vegan if you can't trust the people who are preparing your food. And if they tell you that they are preparing animals and animal byproducts in their kitchen, you can't trust whether or not they might be sneaking some of that off into something that you're getting, even if you think you're getting something vegetarian. So there are places in the city, luckily, fortunately, most of them in our neighborhoods are black owned. So at least we have some black owned businesses and doing the right things. The erectile dysfunction is an important thing because it gets a brother's attention. It's very difficult sometimes to get a man to go to the doctor until the symptoms have become so pronounced that they cannot be ignored, and you know, the somebody forces them, you have to go. You have to go and see what this is. So it's very important to get the attention of men, because I think that if they make a connection between their total functioning, not just their sexual prowess, but their total functioning and their diets, there could be some changes, because men like to get on the grill. You know, every time there's a holiday, there's a celebration, they want to get on the grill. If we can get the brothers to, you know, real men eat plants, that's what you said. Real men eat plants. If we can get the brothers to get off the grill, you know, and do some gardening, or if not do some gardening, get in the kitchen and pick some greens, you know, and do some of these other things. And please don't tell me that all I have to do is take the meat out of the greens. You know, oh, you can eat it, just take the meat out. You can't, because if you cook anything with flesh, it's going to permeate whatever it is. If it's beans, greens, whatever it is, it's going to be in the food that's cooked. Your emphasis on life, that's it, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you know, sister, let me just say that for the benefit of our listeners, I don't want anyone to leave this show feeling as though, well, I can't do that. What do? You get in where you fit in. It's a journey. And it starts with, first of all, changing your mind. Because once you change your mind, your behind will follow. Mm-hmm. So what you do, you know, I say to folks all the time, I'm not trying to convert you into a vegan by tomorrow or next week or what have you. I want you to start a path. And that path for you may be that I begin to integrate, because there's some people who don't eat any vegetables at all. If it ain't, I met a young man who had a bypass surgery at 36, who was a produce person in the grocery store, but didn't eat any of the stuff that he managed. Ate everything fried and everything with animal flesh, even the potatoes. Even when he did eat something, they were fried. So what I'm saying is, start with what you can do. Begin to just add one fresh thing with vibrant color. Not just some iceberg lettuce, but something that's really green.
Some jive lettuce.
Yeah, well, I mean, you want to start, but then, and then begin to add a little more every day, every week. It's a journey. You don't get to the end without making the journey. All of us have to start. All of us are still under construction, and we still all haven't yet, including me.
But doctor, it's a family affair.
Absolutely.
You know, a woman can say, I'm going to go, I'm going to start, I'm going to change. But the husband may say, well, you do that, you know, make me some so-and-so.
Right,
you know?
well, you know, but those are issues that...
And so I have family, I have a family in my kinship group. The wife just looks at her husband and he goes to soul veg. You know, they get along fine because she's not going to do that and he's not going to do that.
Right.
And they agree to disagree and still be under the same roof and get along and raise family of children and grandchildren without being at each other's throats.
Sure.
But it is a family affair. At least if you're not going to do it, you have to be tolerant of the people who want to. The people who want to change, tolerant is the minimal. Supportive would be
better.
Preferred.
Absolutely. And you know, you make a great point. And I just ask people to do just what you said. Start, be tolerant, be willing to accept some things that are different, and before you knock it, try it. I tell folks all the time, one of the big problems we have in America is constipation.
Oh, yes.
Folks, there's all kind of things in the drugstore you go to get for trying to move your bowels. When the first thing I would say, as long as you don't have any medical issues, and if you're over 50, you should have your colonoscopy just to make sure. But one of the things that you should do, if you really want to try and make a change in your bowels, start changing the way you eat. And I ask you for 30 days, if you can, to do the following thing. Number one, drink Unless you have a medical reason not to, drink water. Not
Lots of
stuff
it.
that contains water, no flavored waters. I'm talking about just water. People say alkaline water. I'd be happy if you're not drinking any, to just drink the stuff that comes out your tap to get started. Two, begin to make certain that the bulk of your plate is filled with stuff that comes out of the ground as opposed to stuff that walks or crawls or flies above it. So that means you want to take some of those things out and start eating those things. Three, you also need to start getting sleep. Because the reason why I want you to do this is because the body, when you're in harmony, when the body takes in food into the stomach, the stretching of the stomach causes what's called a gastrocolic reflex. It sends a reflex to the colon to empty. So theoretically, you should almost have a bowel movement shortly after every meal. So if you're eating 4 or 5 times a day and you don't have a bowel movement for 2 days, that's a problem. But if you begin to drink the water, move most of the stuff that's white out of your diet. Move most of the stuff that's white. Stay with the things that have deep colors. Begin to eat, even if it's dried beans. You can rehydrate those and eat them. And you want to eat your greens and your peas and those sort of things. You can mix that sort of stuff up. If you do that, if you would do that for 30 days, you will notice a difference in the frequency of your bowels. You will know that you won't have to go to the bathroom and strain so hard that the vein pop out your head and then it smells so bad you got to keep cans of spray. You will notice a change in the character of the bowel. You'll notice a change in the frequency, and you'll notice a change in the character. And you also notice a change in your skin. Your skin will begin to look much better because your skin is the largest.
Waste.
That's right. And it's the largest organ in the body is skin. And so we need to take care of that. We need to make sure it's moisturized, not greased down, but you got to moisturize it from the inside out. And you do that with adequate hydration. So if you just did that thing, drink the water, eat the fruits and vegetables, you will see, if you do that for 30 days, and we do it every year at the beginning of the year. I ask everybody to join in the restart. We'll be doing that, and I'll come back and we'll talk about it. But if you do those 3 things, I can guarantee you that you will feel better, you will have more frequent and easier eliminations, and you will begin to see a change in your skin. Now, you can't cheat, though, because you're not cheating anybody but yourself. And Dr. Peace, I really appreciate you bringing this book. I have no financial interest in the book or the movie. So see the movie. If you don't have it, you can go to Netflix, you can go to the library, or you can even get it online. I think you'll learn a lot, an awful lot from that movie, and I thank you for this opportunity.
And I thank you for being so willing to be my guest, because anybody that's doing all the stuff you do certainly is, really booked up and overscheduled, but you found the time, and I appreciate you for doing that, and I know you will be blessed and highly favored.
Thank you.